Right, so let's go straight to getting the audience involved in the questioning. And Sola, a question for you. Many businesses complain about the high cost of funding for bank loans in Africa. What is the solution to this? Not an easy place to start.
Well, the real challenge is, what is the interest-free rate for the countries? And you find out typically that, if the interest-free rate is double digits, okay, by the time you add a premium on that for risk, then, you do get the high interest rates. And, I'm not going to talk about why governments keep the interest-free rates. It's linked to maintaining foreign exchange, rates at the level they are, etc. But I think that's the fundamental, and until we have, the risk-free rate coming down, it's a challenge that we will continue to face. But having said that, it is our responsibility collectively to see how we can continue to reduce the cost of borrowing. And I believe that technology is helping to drive that. I mentioned, for instance, that our digital transactions, have been growing at over 40% per annum. The revenues, the negative side to that is that the revenues you get are much lower than through physical channels. We've also seen increasing regulatory push to bring down fees or remove fees altogether. We all know what's happening in Kenya, which is not a good thing, in terms of the interest rate cap, and because ultimately it does hamper business. But we do accept that there is a collective responsibility from both the financiers, the regulators, the central bank, of all the economies, to see how we can continue to bring interest rates down, because at double-digit interest rate, it's almost impossible, for small businesses to survive. Thank you.
Jingdong, can I get you to come in as well?
Yes, indeed. So double-digit interest rate certainly stymies business, but there is another fundamental issue, that is the architecture of financial infrastructure is wrong. Banks in developing countries, because there is no capital market, have been asked to do things that they're not naturally equipped to do. Under Basel III, long-term project financing is so risky, it's capital intensive, right? Banks are the lifeblood of a country's economic system. They are meant to be safe, working capital, mortgages, so on and so forth, and let capital market do the long-term risk-return allocation through a standardized, transparent means. So there are, and I may offend people, but in a generalized model, there is the Anglo-Saxon model of capital market-centric financing. And then there is a continental European model of bank-centric financing. It is interesting to observe, after global financial crisis, and when Basel III is introduced, continental Europe is moving to a capital market-centric model. Let me also say the experience of Malaysia, Korea, China is that not because capital market is bigger, banks are smaller. No, actually, what happens is that you grow the pie of the overall financial system so much bigger, everybody benefits. Both Korea, Malaysia, and China have big banks in addition to big capital market. And the banks actually add new lines of business, investment banking, asset management, insurance, savings, pension, so on and so forth.
Sola, you spoke about collaboration as being a key tenet when you highlighted the three tenets that need to be addressed in scaling for impact. And the next question is very relevant. It is to both of you. Are both your institutions, that's Standard Bank Group and the IFC, currently working together? If so, how? And how could you better collaborate in the future? Sola, if you could start, and then Jingdong.
Yes, the answer is simply yes. Like Jingdong said, banks are not meant to be financing sort of long-term capital or even, venture capital. So partnership, with multilaterals, partnership with the IFC are critical for us to be able to actually complete projects, The debt capital markets is certainly one area of interest to Standard Bank. And, to be able to work with the IFC, a AAA-rated financial institution, to do a local currency bond. Because, you will have known that, about 6 African countries this year already have issued dollar-euro bonds, I think Cote d'Ivoire was a euro bond, but the challenge with that is the FX risk. Okay, and I know a lot of the attraction is the lower interest rates than the domestic bonds, but there is a currency risk that could bite you much later on. And deepening local capital markets is ultimately the way to drive Africa's growth. And yes,
and to hedge against that local currency risk that you were speaking about, the volatility in local currency.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think it was Standard Bank who helped us as an underwriter when we issued the first ever Zambezi bond in Zambia, Kwacha. So a couple of things that banks are really, really critical. The first is that I'm very, very happy with the free trade agreement in Sub-Saharan Africa. Trade is essential for commerce, and banks are essential for trade. And therefore, we have been working with a lot of banks, both on correspondence banking and on trade financing, right? To provide SMEs, to provide smallhold exporter importers, to give them the short-term financing needed to get the trade going. The second big thing is that we at IC really wanted banks to tilt towards not only supporting the blue chips, which they love to do, safe, large, but also how to support SMEs and women entrepreneurs, right? This is where we have done a lot in terms of through risk sharing, through guarantees, to encourage commercial banks to reach out to the next tier, to the third tier, so that financial inclusion also becomes part of the value proposition of commercial banks.
And Sola, you spend a lot of time as Standard Bank Group reaching out to the different tiers that Jingdong is referring to, especially when it comes to trying to foster financial inclusion across the African continent. Can you give me some idea of the solutions that you're deploying at the moment to reach the previously unbanked?
Yes, the unbanked, the retail segment is actually the growth opportunity in Africa. Our corporate banking business is fairly mature. So the future growth is going to come from that SME sector. And it is a high-risk sector, no doubt about it. But part of the challenge is how do we try and de-risk that sector? How do we make it easier for us to lend to that sector? One of the solutions that we have is actually just trying to lend to the value chain of the larger corporates. Because, they're distributors that distribute for these corporates, they're suppliers to those corporates. There's a whole ecosystem around the corporates, which, we have tried to leverage on and find that that's also another way of scaling. But how it de-risks is that those smaller businesses, because either they have a guaranteed market or a cash flow that we are able to monitor, across our system, we find it much easier to lend to them. And mobile money, obviously, is the natural way of reaching more and more people and just getting more people into that segment. And we continue to partner with telcos, with fintechs, to see how we can crack it. But it is still a challenge, but it's something that is a core focus for us at Standard Bank.
And I think you've actually answered the next question, which is, what do you think is the best way to balance the desire to lend to the SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa versus the risks involved in doing so? It was really about elaborating on the value chain around the large corporates and looking at their suppliers. Jingdong, if we could go to this question, which is the lending to Francophone Africa and the challenges in that space, because often we don't talk at length about Francophone Africa.
Well, having lived in Abidjan for 3 ans et demi, 3.5 years, I consider myself a West African myself. The the two the Central Africa CFA zone and the West Africa CFA zone, I think presents very interesting opportunities, yeah? Because once you already have monetary union, and hopefully with the free trade and everything, you know, the collective market is bigger. And yet, the potential has not been fully tapped. A couple of things that are happening. One is this OHADA reform on commercial law that is quite important. That is under the French, the law system. Now the commercial law is really harmonized across all the region. Hopefully that will make commercial dispute, you know, all this contract and everything standardized. As Sola said, standardization is so important. And the second thing is, apart from the language, I think whether it's the Francophone African region, the Portuguese and the Lusophone and the Anglophone, I don't see any difference in terms of the desire, the entrepreneurship. And last but not least, what impressed me now is that with broadband, with mobile phone, there is now no knowledge gap. Whatever invention somebody has done somewhere in the world, everybody knows, right? Whether you live in Africa or somewhere else. So I don't think deliberately designating this zone as that unique is that prominent anymore. But the monetary union with a nominal interest rate in single digit does provide a competitive advantage. So if you look at the interest rate in Côte d'Ivoire, nominal, versus Ghana, there is a huge difference. And hopefully that can give them some advantage for private sector to grow.
Thank you. The questions are coming through fast and furious. Sola, how does Standard Bank view the role of the creative arts sector in Africa's economy? And how, if at all, does Standard Bank seek to collaborate and support the sector?
Yeah, I mean, Standard Bank, we believe that we are more than a financial institution, and we must contribute to the communities where we operate. So the creative arts is certainly part of, you know, a segment of the community that we greatly appreciate. We have supported arts, you know, through the decades. You know, we have annual art events in Johannesburg, in various countries, Nigeria, you know, through the year. What we probably have not done is to lend to artists. And obviously, there has to be a bankable proposition to do that, you know. But certainly, I think in terms of the creative arts, we think they're very, very, very needed part of Africa, and you know, our commitment to that. We have an annual jazz festival, you know, that is very well received by our clients, and I think anything that we can do to support, you know, the continuous growth of the creative sector is certainly something that we are keen to do. Thank you.
Jingdong, foreign investors forget that the US and Europe have had big capital market scandals versus Africa. The credit crunch panic of 1835, 1839. Is the fear justified?
Yes. But we need to learn from lessons, right? So there are two elements to any financial volatility. There is a self-cleansing mechanism, right? At the height of every crisis, there is a sense this is the end of the world. But now, 10 years after the global financial crisis, things are fine. So it is a cycle, and let's not lose sight of that. And once you learn from the lessons, hopefully we can always do better. But if I can bring another element, we have not invested in a symphony orchestra or opera yet, so that's an idea we probably should have. But one thing that people don't know about IC is that most of the time, and we spend tremendous effort in partnering with government, right? Because to solve problems for private sector, mindset of government is really critical. This is why the Ghanaian president's address is very refreshing. When the head of state says, we need private sector, I'm here to assist the private sector. That's music to our ears. But it's not only rhetoric, it's also what are the regulations? What is the capacity building? Actually, in Ghana, we recently finished a country private sector diagnostics. where we invited over 200 private entrepreneurs to come together. And sorry, the president's not here. Most of the private sector, the comments we got probably are complaints. But what we do is we synthesize and then work to identify which are the 3 or 4 bottlenecks. Then we present our findings to government and work with government, work with the World Bank together so that we can systemically solve it to make life easier for the private sector.
So I want to combine one of my questions and pick up on what you were talking about earlier when it comes to bankable projects. And the question is, could you give us an idea of Standard Bank's lending criteria for infrastructure projects? And of course, the adage goes, Sola, that the world is awash with capital looking for a home, but there is a dearth of bankable projects, specifically in Africa.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that it must have strong cash flows. There must be a real demand for the services of that project, and it must have strong cash flows, or the government must be supporting the cash flows to enable its services debt. But it has to be sustainable, and that's really one of the critical challenges. Also, there has to be strong political commitment, to see that project through, like we saw in the Senegal toll road, because, without the political commitment, and I think what was unique about Senegal was that they got the opposition involved in that project. So even if there's a regime change, there is some commitment. You're not going to get the next regime saying, look, let's stop this project after so much has been invested in it. And also the capacity, because a lot of the challenge is the capacity on the public sector side, to actually work and execute on that project. So it is critical. There must be a transparent process for selection of the various parties. And
are we seeing an improvement when it comes to...
There's still work to do. There's still work to do. Like you said, there are pockets of success, but in terms of the enabling environment, one of the main challenges for PPPs is just that the legal framework and the regulatory framework don't support PPPs, and without that in place, it's just very difficult to attract the kind of funding that we need to attract, to close the funding gap. Thank you.
You want to add?
Yeah, so if you look at our slogan, it's called Creating Market, Creating Opportunities, and there is a reason for that. So instead of waiting for a private sponsor to come to us with half-cooked project and only come to IC for financing or come to banks, I think we need to do upstream work. And recently, I think we have been very successful in our scaling solar approach, which is quite exciting. What happens is that instead of every solar sponsor wanting to do their own thing, bespoke way with government, with a procurement contract, can we standardize? Can we work with Zambia government, say, in your economic trajectory, I think you need 5 solar farms here. And we will standardize the power purchase agreement, make it transparent, make it reliable, make it legally binding. Then we open for bidding for sponsors to come in. And we recently completed such a thing in Egypt, where 13 solar farms by 15 different sponsors were amalgamated together as a single project that produces over 750 megawatts of power. And we negotiated and got the whole thing done, World Bank working with the government, IC working with the bidding process, sponsor and everything, in about a year's time. Now, if we were to do this 13 projects one by one in a bespoke fashion, it would have taken us 10 years. So I think rethinking how we engage is very, very important. Standardization, too.
Talking about decentralization, which again was another tenet of your presentation, Sola, what is Standard Bank Group doing to implement decentralization?
Like I pointed out, you have to build the capabilities locally in the countries. Without that, you can't execute on your strategy. And so just making sure that you have the right leadership teams there, They have the right resources, in terms of IT platforms, the funding, the capital to drive the business, and they're empowered to actually do so is so critical. Obviously, governance standards, policies, those things, can't be negotiated away, but on-ground presence to drive growth is critical. You're not serious until you do that. Thank you.
So I want to go to concluding comments to both of my guests this afternoon and bring us back to scaling for impact and the key takeaway that you would like to leave the audience with here today. Jingdong.
I'll go back to the central theme of a country needs to build both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure, I don't have to talk about. Soft infrastructure includes human capital and proper financial market. Because somehow politicians and government officials wanted to deliver tangible results. Therefore, focus on physical infrastructure is understandable. But for the long-term sustainability of economic growth, nurturing the future population as entrepreneurs, as workers, as leaders, one has to really focus on investing in human capital, but also spend the time to build a proper financial system. Because once that system is built, just like Singapore and Hong Kong, they don't have any natural resources. They really relied on human capital, a legal system, a functioning capital market to make themselves some of the most dynamic economy. I think Africa can do it, and we're here to help.
So I love it when we can start finding synergistic themes that we can pull from earlier conversations. And for those of you that were here when Mr. Mustafa Tereb was speaking, the group chairman and CEO of the OCP group, he again put human capital, skills development, and education at the center of the prerequisite to scale for impact in Africa. Sola.
I think collaboration is key. Every single one of us, has a responsibility to see how we can help to drive Africa's growth. And we can't do it by ourselves. We've got to come together. I have found time and time again that anytime there's a problem, if you bring the relevant stakeholders round a table to discuss the problem, the concerns each person has, the risks involved, and how that risk will be shared, you come to a solution. So it's just each person and each institution, just taking ownership of the problem and being committed to find a way, because there is always a way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sola David-Borha, Standard Bank Group, Jingdong Hua, Treasurer of the IFC and Vice President. Thank you so much, sir.